So the first locomotives of the brand new Class 99 fleet recently arrived in the UK, and there's one question on the minds of everyone in the rail freight industry right now. What nickname will the locomotives have? I mean, come on guys, flakes! It's the obvious answer. Video over, show's over, gone, done, don't need to do anything else, that's it. But on a serious note, the sheer potential that these locomotives hold could be the single most important development in UK rail freight traction since the Class 66s transformed the industry nearly 30 years ago. In this video, I'm going to explain what these locomotives are and why they are such a big deal. Quick disclaimer before we get started, I am merely an armchair expert on this topic. I do not work within the railways, and I'm simply a keen enthusiast who has researched this in my spare time. As a result, I've tried to verify the information presented to the best of my abilities, but no one is perfect. So please respectfully let me know in the comments if there are any errors. Now, let's get into it. The Class 99s are a fleet of locomotives ordered by the UK rail freight company GBRf Freight from Stadler Rail. A total of 30 examples of this class have been ordered, with an option for this to be extended by a further 20 examples, financed by and leased from Beacon Rail. The defining feature about this locomotive is not only the fact that they are bi-mode, but its diesel power is significant. This sets the design apart from other modern UK freight locomotives, such as the Class 88, which has a small diesel unit intended for last mile use, whereby freight trains don't have to change locomotives to deliver freight into unelectrified yards. The Class 99s will be able to run on the UK's 25 kV AC overhead electrification system, but will also run off the wires using a 50 litre Cummins QSK 50 V16 diesel engine. We will discuss the projected performance later in this video. Whilst these locomotives were initially intended only for freight work, having a top speed of 75 mph and no electric train supply, GBRf recently confirmed that they were in negotiations for some of the 30 locomotives to be geared for 100 mph with electric train supply and Delner couplers fitted. Whilst this is another exciting announcement that will broaden the possibilities of the locomotives, we will solely be focusing on the freight potential for this video for the sake of simplicity, and thus will only refer to the 75 mph variant. At the time of producing this video, the first two examples of the class, 99001 and 002, arrived in the UK on the 10th of June 2025 and were delivered to Leicester, where Stadler has constructed a new depot, on the 17th of June. I've read rumours online that testing is soon to begin on the West Coast Main Line, although I've been unable to confirm this, and formal entry into revenue earning service is expected to be at the end of 2025. A lot has been said in recent years about the use of diesel locomotives on freight trains that traverse predominantly electrified routes. The Class 66, which is a ubiquitous train used by so many different freight operating companies, is used on an extensive range of routes and different cargo types, many of which are electrified using the 25 kV AC overhead electrification system. This comes with several notable downsides, such as the environmental impact and performance, where electric locomotives are generally able to deliver significantly more power than diesels. However, the lack of total electrification across the UK railways and the presence of unelectrified freight terminals means that utilising electric traction on many key flows is not feasible. And as a result of yard capacity, such as pathing restrictions at Ipswich, the freight operating companies can't simply swap trains from diesel to electric traction en route in many cases. So, what are potential solutions to the problems? Well, the most obvious solution is total electrification, or at least electrification of strategic freight routes. However, this would cost the government money, and given the reluctance of Westminster to fund any meaningful continuous electrification projects in recent years, it looks unlikely that this solution will materialise in the short term, if ever. What about increasing yard capacity at sites like Ipswich to increase the number of trains that can switch to electric traction en route? This solution comes with its own set of downsides. Again, costs are an issue here, perhaps footed by a different bill. But in addition, the time it takes to swap locomotives mid-journey increases the time taken to deliver goods, reducing rail's competitiveness compared to road. A solution that has become more popular in recent years is to build purpose-built, multi-mode locomotives that can both use electric power and get the benefits from that, whilst also being able to traverse unelectrified routes. Despite this, the UK has quite a restrictive loading gauge that limits how large a locomotive can be. This means that you can't simply take an electric locomotive and extend it to include a large diesel engine. Instead, compromises have to be made, which have historically come to the detriment of diesel performance. The Rail Operations Group Class 93s could be considered an example, although the intended use case of this class remained to be seen, as the locomotive features excellent electric performance but impeded diesel power. The impact of this is that we haven't seen so far a bi-mode locomotive that can keep up with standard conventional diesel locomotives off the electrified wires, close enough that they might be considered an alternative. That is until GBRf came in swinging with their new order of Class 99 locomotives. To start with, let's discuss the relationship between power and tractive effort in this context. To be clear, my understanding of this topic is very basic, but I will try to explain this to the best of my ability. Power, simply put, describes the amount of power produced by the locomotive. The more power, the higher speeds it could potentially reach and/or the stronger it can accelerate. In contrast, tractive effort is the pulling capability of the locomotive. Each locomotive has a starting tractive effort, which is what the locomotive can produce from a standstill. The relationship between tractive effort and power is represented by continuous tractive effort, and the train's ability to accelerate decreases as speed increases. The amount of power is inversely proportional to the amount of continuous tractive effort, so the more power, the higher the continuous tractive effort, the greater a train's ability to accelerate at a given speed. Bearing that in mind, let's take a look at the numbers associated with the ubiquitous Class 66 that the new locomotives will be regularly compared to. This will provide us with a benchmark for what makes up the majority of GBRf's current fleet. The Class 66s are a diesel-electric locomotive that have been powered by several variants of the EMD 12N 710 diesel engine. This engine is rated at 2400 kilowatts, but in reality, the locomotives deliver approximately 1850 kilowatts at rail. The starting tractive effort of the class is 409 kilonewtons, and the locomotives have a maximum speed of either 65 or 75 miles per hour, depending on the subvariant. So what about the Class 99s? Well, in comparisons, the initial examples of the class will have a top speed of 75 miles per hour and a starting tractive effort of 500 kilonewtons, or at least up to 500 kilonewtons, depending on the source you look at. In addition, these locomotives will have a power output when running on the overhead electric wires of 6,170 kilowatts, with the diesel engine rated at 1,790 kilowatts. Now, given we're about to discuss the diesel capabilities in depth, what will be the at-rail power delivery when running off the wires? As with any locomotive of this transmission, including the Class 66, engine power is subject to inefficiencies and power losses between what's produced by the engine and what the locomotive can actually deliver. Whilst we don't have a definitive at-rail power output value for the class yet, traction electrification expert Peter Dierman commented as a guest writer for Rail Engineer in 2023 that the locomotives may deliver approximately 1600 kilowatts at rail. It's worth noting that this was predicted back when the locomotives were ordered, so the figures could well differ once testing has been carried out, but for the sake of this video, we will use 1600 kilowatts as a placeholder for the at-rail power output of the Class 99s. Now, let's do some maths. With the Class 66 engines rated at 2400 kilowatts and delivering 1850 kilowatts to the rail, this locomotive loses approximately 23% of its power between the engine and the rails. In contrast, the Class 99 looks much more efficient on paper, with it delivering 1600 of the 1790 kilowatts generated by the engine to the rails, meaning it loses approximately 11%. This improved efficiency is far from uncommon when comparing older locomotives to newer ones, particularly thanks to the wide adoption of AC traction equipment over DC, which applies here as the Class 66 is powered by DC equipment and the Class 99 is presumably powered by AC equipment. So, whilst the engine power ratings for the two classes are noticeably different, the real-world comparison in diesel power is 1,850 kilowatts for the Class 66 and 1,600 kilowatts for the Class 99. That means the Class 99 may only offer a 14% reduction in diesel power when compared to the Class 66. This is truly significant. All diesel-electric bi-mode locomotives built for the UK freight market thus far, including but not limited to classes 88 and 93, have not been able to even scratch at the Class 66 at rail power, yet here we are discussing a locomotive that is within touching distance of this. That's one of the key factors that gives the Class 99s so much potential, and this is without considering starting tractive effort, which is also said to be a significant improvement over the Class 66s. I've read some sources that state the tractive effort for the new locomotives will be up to 500 kilonewtons, and others that say it is 500 kilonewtons, so perhaps this figure may change after testing. However, if we take the 500 kilonewtons at face value, this would offer an 18% improvement in theoretical starting tractive effort over the standard geared Class 66s that make up the majority of GBRf's fleet. Now, I say theoretical here, as this is not only dependent on the actual starting tractive effort figure, but also on how the locomotive performs in adverse rail conditions. Thanks to assumed improvements in wheel slip protection systems, it is fair to say that not only is the tractive effort improved, but that the locomotives should hopefully far exceed their shed counterparts when leaves are on the line. In addition here, GBRf's CEO John Smith has commented multiple times over recent months that the Class 99s are very much designed and expected to exceed the performance of Class 66s at low speeds in both diesel and electric modes. I think it's safe to say the new locomotives have got this one in the bag. Finally, taking both power and starting tractive effort into account, we can look at continuous tractive effort. We can see this visualised on a traction curve diagram where the purple line represents the Class 99 in electric mode, the red line in diesel mode, and the green line representing the Class 66. This diagram may not be perfect and is based solely on my calculations of dividing through the power output of each class by any given speed in meters per second, but it will hopefully indicate how the performance of the two classes compare. From the graph, it is clear that the gap between the continuous tractive effort on the Class 99 in diesel and the Class 66 is small. So what can we learn from these numbers? Well, this shows that when in electric mode, the Class 99s will just be outright better than the Class 66s in terms of performance. But what's most groundbreaking about the locomotives is that, even off the wires, the Class 99s will also perform either very close to or better depending on the situation when compared to the Class 66s. Now that we have this information, let's take a look at how these figures may influence how GBRf deploys the locomotives in service. At this point, we're starting to veer off into speculative territory. So let's start with looking at the movements we know that GBRf are at least looking at, before donning our tinfoil hats and diverting down the path of speculation. Now, as we defined that the Class 66 will have an absolute advantage under the wires, one would expect that the more electrification on a given freight route, the more likely GBRf will deploy the class to it. Firstly, we've got several moves proposed by GBRf thanks to the proposed upcoming East Coast Mainline timetable, and these are explicitly intended to be Class 99 hauled. These moves include several container trains, including Doncaster to Moss End, Tilbury to Wakefield, and London Gateway to Doncaster. These moves make a lot of sense, as almost the entire duration of the movements are electrified, and the less significant weight of container trains compared to other types of cargo means that they are obvious choices. More interestingly, the document suggests Tyne docks to Drax, Rylstone to Hull and Whitemoor Yard to Hoo Junction. These are less obvious due to the significant weight of some of these trains, in addition to the longer unelectrified sections. Then, the one that really caught me off guard was North Blythe to Fort William. Whilst this move features a comparatively light load, a significant portion of the routing takes place on unelectrified lines in Scotland with steep gradients. Now, it must be said that it is not clear from the document whether GBRF intends to run the locos for the duration of this route, as I believe they could theoretically swap locomotives at Miller Hill and have a Class 66 handle proceedings north. However, assuming the intentions are for the new locomotives to handle the entirety of this flow, the list demonstrates the operator's confidence in the Class 99 performance at delivering freight off the wires whilst matching or exceeding their diesel-only counterparts. In addition to these, several flows out of Felixstowe have also been mentioned and discussed in various media, though it's been challenging to verify what specific flows GBRF intends to use the class on. One would expect flows like Felixstowe to Trafford Park, Ditton, Daventry and Hams Hall are all towards the top of priorities for the Class 99 deployment, again given the prevalence of electrification on these routes. However, as we discuss flows out of Southampton, things get a bit trickier. Freight movements from Southampton to Trafford Park, as an example, have to reach Reading before first breaking into overhead electrified territory, but this section only lasts till Didcot. The flow must then continue on diesel to the Birmingham area before traversing mostly electrified lines to the destination. A move like this may push the boundaries of the class's capabilities, particularly due to pathing requirements for the busy unelectrified routes such as the Chiltern Main Line. If the locomotives are capable of running such flows, this significantly widens possible options. Now, let's end with going to the more out there ideas, shall we say. Take 6 Golf 89, the GBRF aggregates movement from Hindlow to Hams Hall. This move starts by traversing unelectrified freight-only lines as far as Chinley. During this time, the trains seldom exceed 20 miles per hour and take on steep gradients at low speeds. This could demonstrate the claimed performance gains over the Class 66 at lower speeds, thanks to both increased tractive effort and wheel slip performance. Once at Chinley, the train descends a gradient to New Mills, allowing the train to build speed without being hindered by reduced diesel power. In the case of this move, the train then heads towards the Mid-Cheshire line, joining it at Northenden Junction and following it to Northwich. This may be where the Class 66 makes some ground due to 60 mph speed limits and flat gradients. However, when the train joins the West Coast Main Line at Crewe, the Class 99 will leave the shed in its dust for most of the way before a final diesel section. Now, whilst there are sections of this route where the Class 66 would presumably perform better, provided the Class 99 can be used on this route, let's think about this from a capacity perspective. Which of these two routes is more likely at the moment to be overcrowded? The Mid-Cheshire line, which sees one stopping train per hour in each direction, as well as a couple of freight trains, or the West Coast Main Line, which sees a huge variety of different services. From this perspective, it doesn't matter if a Class 66 would pass Moberly 10 miles per hour quicker than a Class 99, when the latter would be running at line speed at perhaps half the distance or time as the former south of Crewe. I'm confident that this sort of strategic thinking forms the backbone of many discussions at GBRF and potentially other operators looking to invest. How can this locomotive be deployed on less conventional routes? Are the capabilities of the locomotives more comparable off-wires to the Class 66? Well, based on the performance data that we looked at earlier, I think it's fair to say that they'll get at least very close, if not better, than the Class 66s in so many different cases that we thought potentially earlier might not be the case. And if that materialises, perhaps the Class 66s have met their maker as being the predominant locomotive in the United Kingdom. The The point here is not to replace the Class 66s entirely, but more so to reduce their movements perhaps, to a degree where the Class 99 might become the predominant force behind the majority of freight movements in the UK. Whether that materialises or not, we will soon find out. Thank you very much for making it to the end. If it doesn't come across on camera, this is a topic I've found real enjoyment in researching, and I very much look forward to witnessing how these locomotives change the UK railway freight industry over the coming years. A special shout out goes to the following YouTube channels who provided permission to me for using their footage within this video. Thank you guys so much. Be sure to check out their channels with the links in the description below. Making content like this takes considerably more effort than my standard trains at videos, so I can't commit to uploading these on a regular basis. However, if you would like to see some high quality trains videos and then the occasional mini documentary, then please subscribe for more. Thank you very much for watching.